one afternoon in March, at the gold-adorned mansion of the Thin family in the heart of the city. Who do you think you are? The sound of high heels cracked sharply against the marble floor. Vivian, 8 months pregnant, hair in tangles, clothes stained and dirty, looked up from inside a cold iron cage that reeked of dog. Selena leaned down slowly, her smile thin as a blade. Wife, in this house, you're nothing but my pet. Vivian pressed her lips tight, both hands wrapped around her belly. Her eyes didn't cry, but what burned inside them wasn't tears. It was fire. From the bottom of that humiliating cage, the pregnant woman had already begun planning a revenge that would shake a billion-dollar empire to its core. Would she pull it off? Don't go anywhere, the story starts right now. Before I tell you what happened to Claire Harmon on the night of October 14th, I need you to understand something important. The most dangerous prison in the world does not have bars you can see. It does not have guards or iron doors or chains. The most dangerous prison has crown molding. It has a sub-zero refrigerator and a heated marble floor. It has a husband who brings you chamomile tea and kisses your forehead and tells you everything is going to be fine. Claire Harmon was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and sleeping in a $12 million home in Greenwich, Connecticut, when her life changed forever. She did not know it was changing. That is the first thing you need to understand. When the worst moments of our lives arrive, they rarely arrive with warning. They arrive the way all truly dangerous things arrive, quietly, wrapped in something familiar. The last thing Claire remembered clearly was the massage table, the candles, the soft music that played from hidden speakers in the wall, the woman who called herself Amber and had careful, professional hands and offered her herbal tea in a small china cup, chamomile and lavender, Amber had said, very calming, especially in the third trimester. Claire had drunk half the cup, then the room had tilted, very gently, the way a boat tilts on still water, and then there was nothing. When she opened her eyes, she was on a concrete floor, cold, so cold that the chill had worked its way through her nightgown and into her bones. The darkness was not the soft darkness of a bedroom with moonlight coming through the curtains. This darkness was different, thick, wrong, the kind of darkness that felt intentional. Claire lay still for a moment, gathering her senses the way you gather yourself after a fall. Her back ached. She tried to stretch and her hand hit metal. She tried to sit up and her other hand hit metal from the other side. The realization did not come all at once. It came slowly, the way terrible things come when your mind is protecting you, piece by piece, bar by bar. She was enclosed. She was in something small, something that had a door with a latch, and a floor lined with old carpet, and a water bowl near her feet, and something else. Something that made her stomach turn completely over. A metal bowl with little bone shapes stamped around the rim. Dog food inside it. The generic kind. The kind that smelled like salt and something she did not want to identify. Claire pressed both hands over her pregnant belly. The baby moved. 1, 2, 3 kicks, as if to say, where are we? What is this? Are we okay? She could not answer that question. Not yet. Her mouth tasted like cotton. Something soft and expensive was tied across her lower face. She reached up, felt the fabric. Silk. Cream-colored, with a faint embroidered pattern at the edge. She knew this fabric. She had worn it on her honeymoon. It was the scarf that Grant's mother had given her as a wedding gift, with the remark that every Whitfield woman needed at least one piece of real silk. She was gagged with her own wedding gift, in a dog crate. In the basement of the house she shared with her husband, and somewhere above her, she could hear footsteps. Heels clicking on the marble floors of the house she had chosen with such care, in the neighborhood she had worked so hard to belong to, in the life she had spent 3 years building. The footsteps were not her husband's. They were lighter, more precise, the walk of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. Claire tried to call out. The sound that came through the silk gag was not words. It was not even close to words. It was the sound of a woman discovering that she is more alone than she has ever been. Nobody came. She counted her heartbeats instead, tried to slow her breathing. The baby needed her calm. The baby needed oxygen and warmth and a mother who was not falling apart in a storage room. So Claire Harmon, former second-grade teacher, did what she had done in her worst classroom moments. She counted. She breathed. She waited. The footsteps came down the stairs eventually. The door at the top opened and light flooded down. And for one blazing second, Claire felt hope so sharp it was almost physical. Grant. It had to be Grant. He would see this. He would explain. He would get her out and hold her, and they would figure out who had done this and why. The silhouette that appeared at the top of the stairs was female. She descended slowly, one step at a time, as if she had all the time in the world. When she reached the bottom and came into the thin light from the basement's single bare bulb, Claire saw her face. Vanessa Cole, Grant Whitfield's vice president of operations, introduced to the world 2 months ago at a foundation fundraiser in exactly this town. The woman who laughed at Grant's jokes a half-second too slowly. The woman who stood too close. The woman Claire had told herself she was being paranoid about. Vanessa was holding her phone. The camera light was on, red and steady. She was recording. She crouched down in front of the crate bars, and her expression was pleasant and conversational. The way a person looks when they are discussing the weather with a neighbor. "Good morning, Claire," she said. "Grant wanted me to check on you. Make sure you were comfortable. Are you comfortable?" Claire made sounds behind the gag. Vanessa nodded as if Claire had said something interesting. "I'll take that as a no. That's okay. You'll adjust." She tilted her head. "You know, this crate used to belong to Grant's parents' Labrador. Beautiful dog. Very well trained. Knew exactly where it stood." She paused. "Do you know where you stand?" Claire, she stood and walked slowly around the crate, inspecting it the way a person inspects a piece of furniture they are considering returning. "Here is what is going to happen," she said. "By tonight, you will understand your situation completely. By morning, you will sign the papers that Grant needs signed, and then you will leave. You will take the settlement, and you will go somewhere quiet, and you will raise your child, and you will never speak about this family again." She stopped walking. "Or you will not sign, and we will proceed to the alternative plan, which involves a psychiatric evaluation, a court order, and medical records that have been in your file for the past 3 weeks, documenting a pattern of severe prenatal instability." She smiled. "Grant's doctor is very thorough." Claire lunged forward. The crate rattled against the concrete floor. Her pregnant belly made it impossible to generate any real force. And she knew it. And Vanessa knew it. And the sound of Vanessa's laugh echoed off the bare basement walls. "Oh, I almost forgot," Vanessa said, turning for the stairs. "Your mother called. I told her you were sleeping in. Pregnancy fatigue." She completely understood. "She said to tell you she loves you." The door at the top of the stairs closed. The light disappeared. Claire sat in the darkness with her bound wrists in her lap and her baby moving steadily inside her and the taste of expensive silk in her mouth. She thought about her mother. She thought about the chamomile tea. She thought about the words she had told herself for 3 months every time something felt wrong. "You are being paranoid. You are exhausted. You are emotional. Grant loves you. He chose you." He had chosen her. That part was true. He had chosen her very, very carefully. And she had not understood what that meant until she was sitting in a dog crate in the basement of his house with his mistress's laughter still ringing in the rafters above her head. She placed both hands on her stomach. The baby kicked again. Strong this time. Steady. Claire closed her eyes, and she began to think. Not about how frightened she was. She was beyond frightened. She was in some territory past fear that did not have a name yet. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what she had. She thought about who in the world, right now, might notice she was gone before it was too late. And then she started making a plan. To understand what happened to Claire Harmon, you need to understand who she was before Grant Whitfield found her. She grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a 3-bedroom house on a street where people parked their cars on the lawn and left their porch lights on at night. Her mother, Judith, worked the front desk at a dental practice for 22 years. Her father drove long-haul trucks until his knees gave out. And then he drove shorter routes until his back gave out. And then he did what men in that neighborhood did. He found something else and he kept going. Claire was the first person in her family to go to college. She got a full scholarship to Ohio State, and she did not waste a single day of it. She graduated with a degree in elementary education, moved into a studio apartment in Columbus with 2 other teachers, and spent the next 4 years in a second-grade classroom in a public school on the east side of the city. She loved that job with the kind of love that most people reserve for other people. She loved the way 7-year-olds approached the world with complete seriousness. She loved the moment when a child who had been struggling suddenly understood something, the way their whole face changed, like a light being turned on in a room that had been dark for a long time. She was good at it. Her students' reading scores improved. Parents requested her specifically. She was 29 years old, happy and busy and not particularly looking for anything, when she met Grant Whitfield at a friend's wedding in Newport, Rhode Island. He was not what she expected. That is the first thing everyone says about Grant Whitfield. And it was true then, and it would remain true for much longer than it should have. He was tall, well-dressed, with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to worry about money, but none of the coldness she associated with that kind of life. He was funny. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered 3 weeks later that she had mentioned her sister's cat was named Gerald, after Gerald Ford, because her sister thought that was hilarious for reasons that did not need to make sense to anyone else. He remembered Gerald the cat. That was what got her. They dated for 14 months. He flew to Columbus to meet her parents on their fourth date, which was both intense and oddly charming. He sat in her parents' kitchen and ate Judith's pot roast and talked to her father about the trucking industry with what appeared to be genuine interest. He told Claire later that he had researched trucking deregulation before the visit because he wanted to be able to have a real conversation. He had researched her family. At the time, she thought this was romantic. She married him 13 months later in a ceremony that was significantly larger than anything she had ever imagined for herself. 250 guests, a historic estate in Connecticut, a dress that cost more than her first car. She stood at the altar in that dress and looked at the man she was marrying and felt something that she would later have trouble naming accurately. Not just love, something more complicated, a kind of vertigo, the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff you have chosen to jump from, hoping the water below is deep enough. The first year was good, genuinely good. She would insist on this later, because it mattered. It was not all a performance. There were real evenings, real laughter, real moments of connection. Grant was attentive and generous and thoughtful in ways that still surprised her. He noticed when she was tired. He brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it without being asked. He remembered everything. He always remembered everything. The drift began slowly, so slowly that she almost missed it entirely. Her college friends called less often, and she was always busy when they called. And gradually the calls became texts and the texts became nothing. Her mother mentioned once, carefully, that Claire seemed different, more careful, somehow, like she was choosing her words. "I am fine," Claire said. "I am happy. We are happy." And then Grant mentioned that he found Claire's friend Rebecca a bit much, and Claire found herself agreeing. And then he mentioned that her former colleague from the school seemed a little rough around the edges for their social circle now, and Claire had nodded and not pushed back. And then she realized one afternoon that the only people she spent time with regularly were people who knew Grant first. She told herself this was normal, that life changed when you got married, that she had made choices and the choices had consequences and the consequences were not bad. They were just different. She had traded something small and traded up for something larger. She told herself this story for 3 years. Then she got pregnant. She found out on a Tuesday morning in late January, in the bathroom of the guest suite, because she did not want to use their master bathroom for some reason she could not have explained. The test showed positive immediately, strongly, no ambiguity. She sat on the tile floor for a long time, the test in her hand, doing the math she needed to do. She was 4 months along. She had not known. The pregnancy had been quiet, and she had been tired, and she had attributed it to the previous winter, to adjusting to their life, to everything except the thing it actually was. She had planned to tell Grant on their honeymoon. She had planned to tell him when she was certain. She had planned many things that had not happened in the sequence she intended. She did not tell him that night, or the next night. She needed time to understand the feeling that had settled over her when she sat on that tile floor. Not unhappiness, not exactly. More like a door closing somewhere. A version of the future she had been imagining, gentle and orderly, being replaced by something she could not see the shape of yet. She would later understand that what she had felt, without being able to name it, was instinct, the oldest kind of knowledge, something in her body that understood what her mind was still refusing to. She did not tell Grant she was pregnant until after they had signed the prenuptial agreement he had asked her to sign before the wedding. A formality, he had said, something his lawyers required, standard language, nothing concerning. She had signed it without reading it carefully. She had been 4 months pregnant and in love and trying to build something real, and the document had been 43 pages long, and she had been so certain that the details did not matter because the relationship was solid. She would spend a long time thinking about that decision later, but none of that came yet. What came first was the gala, the charity fundraiser in Greenwich, the evening when everything that Claire had been telling herself began to crack apart, one small piece at a time, and she still tried to hold it together with both hands. The Whitfield Foundation annual gala was held the second Saturday of October at the Whitfield Estate in Greenwich. 200 guests, politicians, business leaders, old money in its third generation, new money in its first. The kind of room where everyone knew everyone, and the conversations were careful, and the smiles were practiced, and the only honest emotion in the building was the quiet. Constant competition beneath every exchange. Claire had been helping plan the event for 6 months. It was her project, her responsibility. The thing she had put her energy into through the first months of the pregnancy when she needed something to do with her hands and her mind. She knew every detail, the centerpieces, the menu, the seating chart, the timing of the speeches. She had rebuilt herself into this event, the way you rebuild yourself into anything when you are trying to feel like you belong somewhere. She stood at the top of the grand staircase at 6:15 in the evening in a gown that was slightly too tight across the middle now, her hair arranged carefully, her face composed into the expression she had learned in 3 years of being a Whitfield wife. Not too warm, not too cold, present and appropriate and always smooth. Grant appeared beside her in his black tuxedo, diamond cufflinks, hair perfectly styled. He looked at her with an expression that she recognized as affection and that she would later understand was assessment. He was checking that she was ready, that she would perform correctly, that the investment was presenting well. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you," she said, and took his arm, and descended the stairs. The woman she noticed first was standing near the bar at the far end of the ballroom. Red dress, elegant and form-fitting, dark hair. She was talking to Grant's business partner, Marcus Webb, and she was laughing at something he said, and her laugh carried across the room in a way that felt almost deliberate. Vanessa Cole. Grant had introduced her 2 weeks earlier, at a small dinner, very casually. New vice president of operations. Came highly recommended. Incredible credentials. He had mentioned her the way he mentioned other professional relationships. Smoothly and without emphasis. Claire had shaken her hand and felt something she did not examine too closely. Now watching Vanessa Cole from across the ballroom, Claire examined it. The woman stood with the ease of someone who knew this room. Not a newcomer's carefulness, but a kind of preparatory comfort. She turned and found Grant across the room with her eyes in the precise, automatic way you find something you have been looking for. Grant looked back, just for a second. Then he turned to the ambassador he was talking to and said something that made the man laugh. "Magnificent party," said a voice at Claire's elbow. Grant's mother, Margaret Whitfield, in cream chiffon, with a glass of champagne and a smile that had been perfected over 40 years of gatherings exactly like this one. "You've done a wonderful job, darling, as always." "Thank you, Margaret." "Have you met Vanessa?" "Grant's new executive. She's right over there." "Such a lovely girl. Vice president at 26. Extraordinary, isn't it?" She touched Claire's arm gently. "You should go say hello." Claire started to step forward. Margaret's fingers tightened, just fractionally, just for a moment. "Perhaps after dinner," Margaret said. "Let her enjoy the event. You know how overwhelming these evenings can be for newcomers." Claire looked at her mother-in-law. Margaret's smile did not change at all. Translation. Claire understood. In the language she had spent 3 years learning. Stay away from her. Do not make a scene. Protect what we are all pretending not to notice. The dinner was 8 courses and lasted 4 hours. Claire sat at the head table with Grant on her right and an empty chair on her left where Thomas Whitfield should have been. Were he not in Singapore on business that seemed to require him to miss every family event for the past 2 years? She ate her salmon and sipped her water and listened to the speeches and felt the baby move during the 4th speech. A politician talking about family values into a microphone with practiced emotion. She did not find this funny. She found it unbearable in a way she could not show on her face. In the bathroom, between the 6th and 7th courses, she sat in the largest stall and pressed her palms flat against the cool metal of the partition and breathed. Just breathed. She could hear the party going on without her. The sound of it filtered through the marble walls. Muffled but present, music, laughter. The steady hum of people performing happiness at each other. The door opened. 2 sets of heels on marble. 2 voices she recognized. Amanda, her maid of honor from the wedding, and a woman from the foundation board whose name Claire always mixed up. Laura or Linda. Something that started with L. "Did you see her dress?" Amanda said. Her voice was light and social. The voice she used at parties. Not her real voice. "Poor thing. She's enormous." "Clayton looks miserable," the other woman said. She meant Grant. People in this circle had private names for each other that Claire had never been fully let in on. Another small fence around the inside of the territory. "Well, what did he expect?" Amanda said. "She got pregnant 6 months in. Everyone knows it was intentional." "That's uncharitable," the other woman said, but weakly. The way people say that's uncharitable when they want to seem balanced while believing the thing entirely. Is it? She was a school teacher. He's worth $40 million. She's in her late 20s and the clock is ticking. It's not complicated. The water ran. The dryer ran. The heels clicked back toward the door. "I almost feel sorry for her," Amanda said. "She really thinks this is real." The door closed. Claire sat in the stall for a long time. She counted the floor tiles, 9 across, 12 deep, 108 tiles. She counted them twice. Then she stood up, washed her hands, reapplied her lipstick, and walked back out to the dinner. After the dessert course, she went looking for Grant. She found him in his study. The door was open 2 inches. He was on his phone, his back to the entrance. "No, tomorrow night," he was saying. "When she's gone, we'll have the whole place to ourselves." A pause, and then, "I know, I'm tired of pretending too." He turned and saw her. His expression did something she had never seen it do before. It reset like a computer rebooting, all in an instant. The thing that had been there before replaced with something constructed and smooth. He ended the call. "Who was that?" Claire asked. "Marcus. The Henderson merger. The timing is complicated. You said you were tired of pretending." "About the deal structure." "Claire, it is a complicated deal." He set his phone on the desk, and his voice was patient and gentle and exactly as it always was. "You look tired. This was a long evening. Why don't you go up and I'll be there soon?" This was her moment. She knew it then, in the way you sometimes know things before you know them. This was the moment to say what she had seen and heard and felt for months. To name it and make it real, and force the conversation into the open where it would have to be dealt with honestly. "You're right," she said instead. "I'm tired." She climbed the stairs. She took off the tight gown and put on her nightgown and brushed her teeth and got into the enormous bed with its 1,000-thread count sheets and its pillows that cost more than her parents' monthly mortgage payment. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the party winding down below her. This is the moment I want to stay with for just a moment, because it matters more than anything that comes later. Not because Claire made the wrong choice, but because it was not a choice made from weakness. It was a choice made from the same place all of us make our hardest choices. From the place where we are most afraid of what the truth will cost us. She had built something here. She was 7 months pregnant. She had people she loved, and a life she had chosen, and a version of the future that she was not ready to let go of. And the human mind, when it is faced with evidence that will destroy the life it has built, will perform extraordinary acts of self-protection. If any part of this feels familiar as you listen, I want you to notice that. The moment when you talked yourself out of what you already knew, that is not stupidity, that is not weakness. That is a system that was designed, by someone very deliberate, to work exactly that way. Grant came to bed at 3 in the morning. He smelled like scotch and expensive cologne. He stayed on his side of the bed and did not touch her. Claire kept her eyes closed and her breathing even and pretended to be asleep. She was not asleep, she was counting, waiting, beginning, without knowing it yet, to prepare. The morning after the gala was warm and careful and wrong in ways Claire could not have articulated. Grant brought her coffee in bed, her exact order, the way she had taken it since college, black with 1 spoon of honey. He brought croissants from the bakery in the village. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed her feet and talked about baby names with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. He was warm and present and attentive in exactly the way he had been in the first year of their marriage. This should have reassured her. Instead, it frightened her more. Because she had lived with this man for 3 years, and she knew the difference between him being present and him performing presence. And this was performance. She could feel the effort of it in every gesture. The way you can sometimes feel the mechanism behind a magic trick even when you cannot see it. She smiled and drank her coffee and said the names she liked. After breakfast, Grant kissed her forehead and said he had calls to make, that he would be back by lunch, that he had a surprise for her in the afternoon, something he thought she would love. He said this with such warmth that for a moment she almost believed it. Almost. She spent the morning moving through the house in the particular way she had developed over 3 years, a kind of managed invisibility. The housekeeper, Betty Harmon, was cleaning the guest wing. Betty was a 53-year-old woman from Hartford who had worked for the Whitfield family for 9 years and who communicated primarily through brief, careful sentences and a quality of observation so precise that Claire sometimes felt Betty noticed things in this house that no one else permitted themselves to see. Betty glanced up when Claire passed, said nothing, but her eyes held something that Claire would think about later. The phone call came just after 1 o'clock. Claire was in the hallway outside Grant's home office, passing on her way to the kitchen. The door was open 2 inches. She had not been moving quietly or carefully. She was simply walking through her own house, 7 months pregnant, on her way to make herself a sandwich. Grant's voice came through the gap. "She's going to be a problem, Vanessa. The timeline doesn't work with the baby." Claire stopped. "I know. We're working on it." A pause. "Just keep the Singapore deal on hold until after the papers are signed. Once she's out of the picture, the partnership structure is clean again. Everything goes through as planned." Another pause. It has to be before the birth. After the birth, the custody situation becomes complicated, and I cannot afford complicated right now. Claire pushed the door open. Grant turned. The reset happened again. Fast, but not fast enough. She saw the flicker of it. The fraction of a second before the composed and loving husband replaced whatever had been there before. He said her name warmly. She said, "Who was that, Marcus? The Henderson deal. You know how he gets about timelines. You said she is going to be a problem." The deal structure. Marcus refers to the Singapore firm as she sometimes. It's a habit. Grant, you look pale. Have you eaten today? With the baby, you need to be eating regularly, and I don't think you've been. Who is going to be out of the picture? He crossed the room. He put both hands on her face, very gently, and looked directly into her eyes. And his expression was full of such careful, constructed concern that she felt something inside her chest go cold. "You're exhausted," he said. "Last night was too much. You've been under tremendous stress, and Dr. Ellison warned us that in the third trimester. Anxiety can distort perception. That's not a criticism, sweetheart. That's just how it works. Dr. Ellison warned us." The fourth time she had heard that phrase in 2 months. She stepped back from his hands. "I want to call Meg," she said. Meg Foster. Her best friend from college. The one person in her life who had known her before any of this. Grant's expression did not change. "Of course. Call Meg. Tell her we said hello." He checked his watch. "I have to finish this call. I'll be done in an hour and then we'll go do your surprise." "Okay, I love you." He turned back to his desk. Claire walked to the kitchen. She made the sandwich she had been going to make. She ate half of it standing at the counter and put the other half back in the refrigerator and picked up her phone and stood for a long moment looking at Meg's name in her contacts. She put the phone back in her pocket. Because what would she say? "My husband was on the phone with someone," he said. He said timeline. He said papers. "And he is very kind to me and attentive this morning in a way that feels wrong, but I cannot explain why it feels wrong without sounding exactly like what he is telling me I am. Paranoid, anxious, hormonally distorted." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Every time she tried to name what she was feeling, the explanation for why she should not trust her own feelings was already in place. The gaslighting was not crude or obvious. It was woven so completely into the fabric of their daily life that pulling on one thread meant unraveling something she was not sure she was ready to face. She told herself she would talk to Meg after the surprise, after she saw what Grant had planned, after she gave him one more chance to be the man she had chosen. 2 hours later, she was lying on a massage table in the spa wing of their home, and a woman who had introduced herself as Amber was offering her herbal tea in a small china cup. Chamomile and lavender. Very calming. Claire drank half the cup. The room tilted, gently, and then it tilted again, less gently, and then it stopped tilting because the world had gone completely still in the way that worlds go still when they have gone entirely dark. She did not feel herself being lifted. She did not feel the hands that carried her through the hallways and down the stairs to the basement. She did not feel the door of the crate closing. She felt the cold of the floor when she came back. That was all. Betty Harmon was not supposed to be at the Whitfield house on Tuesday afternoon. It was her day off. She had plans. Her sister was visiting from Hartford, and they were going to have lunch and walk along the waterfront and talk about everything they did not get enough time to talk about during Betty's regular work weeks. She was halfway to her sister's apartment when she realized she had left her phone charger plugged into the outlet in the utility room off the kitchen. She had a specific charger she needed, the fast one, because her phone battery had been dying by 3 o'clock lately, and she had an appointment the following morning that she could not miss. She almost did not go back. She almost let the charger wait until Wednesday. She thought about it for almost a full minute, sitting at a red light on Elm Street, and then she turned around. She parked in the back, as she always did, used her key on the kitchen entrance, called out to announce herself, as she always did, because Mrs. Whitfield sometimes napped in the afternoon and Betty did not want to startle her. No answer. She went to the utility room, found her charger, stood in the kitchen for a moment, automatically checking whether everything was as it should be, and then she heard it, from the basement, through the utility door that connected to the storage stairs, faint and muffled but unmistakable. Crying, Betty Harmon stood in that kitchen for 11 seconds. She counted them later, turning this moment over in her mind the way you turn a small stone over and over. 11 seconds between hearing the sound and moving toward it. She had worked for the Whitfield family for 9 years. In 9 years, she had heard things she was not supposed to hear, and seen things she was not supposed to see, and understood things about this family that she had never said out loud to anyone. She had made herself useful and invisible, the way domestic workers learn to make themselves, and in her invisibility she had also made herself a witness. She had a daughter named Caroline who lived in Phoenix now and worked at a hospital and called every Sunday. Caroline had married young, at 22, to a man named David who was charming and attentive and remembered everything, and who over 5 years had dismantled her confidence so completely that by the time Betty finally understood what was happening, Caroline was a different person. It had taken 3 years and significant professional help to rebuild her. Betty had not seen it coming with Caroline. She had believed the version of events that David presented with such consistency. She had said to her daughter, more than once, that she was sure she was just stressed, that marriage was difficult, that David seemed to genuinely love her. She had been wrong, and she had carried that wrongness with her every day since. 11 seconds. Then she went down the basement stairs. She found Claire Harmon in a dog crate on the basement floor, bound with soft restraints, gagged with her own silk scarf. 7 months pregnant, in the dark. Betty did not make a sound. She crossed the basement floor in 7 steps and had the latch open in 3 seconds, and her hands on Claire's face in 2 more. "Oh God," she said quietly. "Oh God, what did they do to you?" She removed the gag first. Claire's first word was water. Betty ran upstairs, came back with a glass, helped Claire drink, then worked on the restraints. They fell away. Claire tried to stand and could not. 7 months pregnant and drugged and trapped in cold for hours, her body had reached its limit. "I need to call the police," Betty said. "Not yet." Claire's voice was rough and careful. "Help me upstairs first. I need to think." Betty supported most of Claire's weight up the stairs, through the hallway, to the guest bathroom on the first floor. She closed the door and sat on the edge of the tub and watched Claire sit on the closed toilet lid and stare at the tile floor. 9 across, 12 deep, 108 tiles. "How did you know to come back?" Claire asked. Betty told her about the phone charger. "How long?" Claire asked. "How long has this been going on?" Betty was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and placed a small USB drive on the vanity countertop between them. "I have been keeping records," she said, "for 9 years. Everything I was not supposed to see, everything I was not supposed to hear, financial documents, audio recordings I made in common areas, text messages he sent from his work phone that he left open on the kitchen counter, photographs of women who came and went. I have been waiting." She paused. "I was waiting for someone who was ready to fight." Claire looked at the drive. Then at Betty. "Why didn't you leave?" Claire asked. "Because I needed to be here when this moment came," Betty said simply. "And because I knew it would come." Men like Grant Whitfield do not stop. They refine. They improve the method. And eventually they make a mistake that someone is close enough to document. She held Claire's gaze. "You are that mistake," Betty said. "You are the first one who can take this all the way. But you need to move right now, before they come home." Claire looked at the drive for another 3 seconds. Then she picked it up and put it in her pocket. "My phone," she said. "I need my phone. And I need my wallet and my insurance cards and anything with my name on it. And we need to go." They went to the master bedroom. Grant's car was still in the driveway, but Vanessa's was gone. And Betty thought he was somewhere in the house but moving quietly. They moved fast. Claire pulled clothes from the closet and shoved them into a bag and found her wallet and her insurance cards and the birth documents and the small amount of cash she kept in the bedside drawer. Her phone was on the nightstand. 53 missed calls. All from Grant. She opened the most recent voicemail. His voice was calm and steady and perfectly constructed. "Claire, I know you're awake in there. Here's what happens next. I've already spoken with Dr. Ellison. I've already started the paperwork for a psychiatric evaluation. Your chart has documentation of prenatal instability going back 3 weeks. That's enough for a voluntary commitment order. And if you push me, I will push for involuntary. You come home tonight. We have a conversation. We handle this like adults. Or you take this somewhere public, and I destroy your credibility so thoroughly that no family court judge in this state will give you anything." He paused. "I don't want to do that, Claire. I really don't. But I will." She saved the voicemail. She took a slow, steady breath. Then she picked up her bag and followed Betty Harmon out the back door and did not look back at the $12 million house that had been, for 3 years. The most beautiful cage she had never been able to see. Meg Foster opened her apartment door in scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID from a 12-hour shift at Hartford General, and looked at Claire with the particular focused assessment of an emergency room physician. Then she stepped aside and said, "Come in. Tell me everything." They sat in Meg's small living room. The apartment was $140,000 less expensive than Claire's former home in every possible way, and the most comforting place Claire had been in years. Photographs from college on the walls. A cat named Howard who came and investigated and then lost interest. A couch with a throw blanket worn soft from years of use. Claire told her everything. From the gala to the phone call to the massage to waking up on the concrete floor. Meg did not interrupt. She listened with the stillness of someone who was cataloging information as it came in, already thinking several steps ahead. When Claire finished, Meg went to get her medical bag from the closet. "I'm going to document every injury," she said. "Every bruise, every mark from the restraints. I want photographs of everything, dated and time-stamped. Then we do a blood draw, and I get it to a colleague tonight. If there are sedatives in your system, we need that on record while it's still detectable." She worked methodically, photographed the bruising on Claire's wrists where the restraints had been, measured and documented the marks, asked specific questions about the tea, the timing, the rate at which consciousness had gone. The blood results came back 4 hours later. While Betty sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and Claire lay on Meg's couch with a blanket and the phone in her hand. Benzodiazepines, a medium-acting sedative, administered without consent. "This is assault," Meg said. "This is documented, provable assault, and we need a lawyer tonight." 3 firms said no by midnight, Meg reported, coming back from the second bedroom where she had been making calls. "The Whitfield name is too large. Nobody wants the fight. Keep calling." The 4th call went to James Calloway, semi-retired, former district attorney for Hartford County for 14 years. His office, according to Meg's contact who provided the number, looked like a law library that had been through several moderate earthquakes and never fully recovered. He answered on the second ring, at 11:15 at night. He listened to Meg's summary without interrupting. Then he said, "Tell her I'll be there in 40 minutes. He arrived in 38. He was 57 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of tired eyes that come not from lack of sleep, but from having seen too much of what human beings do to each other over too many years." He shook Claire's hand with a firm grip and sat down in the armchair across from the couch and said, "Tell me from the beginning. Leave nothing out." She did. When she finished, he was quiet. Not the hesitant quiet of someone formulating polite refusal. The dense, working quiet of someone processing a large amount of information very quickly. "My daughter," he said finally, "was married to a man with a different last name and an identical pattern of behavior. She came to me for help in year 2 of the marriage. I told her she seemed stressed, that she should try harder, that men like her husband didn't mean harm. They just had difficulty expressing emotion." He picked up his pen. "She has been in therapy for 11 years. The damage done in that marriage is something she will manage for the rest of her life. I am the reason she did not leave sooner." He met Claire's eyes. "I am not making that mistake again. Show me the drive." They spent 3 hours going through the contents. The USB drive contained 9 years of Betty's patient, methodical documentation, photographs of Vanessa's car in the driveway at hours that indicated overnight stays, going back 18 months, audio recordings of phone conversations conducted in the kitchen while Betty was in the adjacent utility room, capturing not explicit confessions but patterns, fragments, the texture of a relationship that had been ongoing far longer than anyone had admitted. Financial records showing significant asset transfers into accounts that were not part of the marital estate, and one document that James Calloway read twice before he said anything. It was a partnership agreement between Grant Whitfield and Vanessa Cole, dated 3 years and 4 months ago. Before the proposal, before the engagement, before the wedding, James set the document on the coffee table and turned the laptop so Claire could see the screen. He pointed to a specific clause. Partners must remain unencumbered by marital obligations or dependent children to maintain equal control of the entity and joint voting rights on all strategic decisions. Claire read it 3 times. "He planned this before he proposed to me," she said. "Earlier than that, I think. Look at the financial movements." James indicated a series of dated transfers. He began moving assets 8 months before he proposed. He was building the exit structure before he built the relationship. The room was very quiet. "This is what I want you to sit with for a moment. Not the rage, though the rage is appropriate, but this." Grant Whitfield did not fall in love with Claire Harmon and then fall out of love and handle it badly. He selected her. He researched her. He remembered her sister's cat's name because he was building a file, constructing a relationship engineered to achieve a specific outcome. She had not been a wife to him. She had been a liability he had not yet activated. The pregnancy had accelerated the timeline. That was all. And here is what I want to say directly to anyone listening right now who is in something that feels like this, who has ever been told that their perception is the problem, that their anxiety is distorting what is real. There is a difference between a relationship that is difficult and a relationship that is designed to make you doubt yourself. Genuine love does not require you to stop trusting your own senses. If you find yourself constantly explaining away what you see and hear and feel, please talk to someone outside the relationship. One person. That is the first step. Just one. The prenuptial agreement, James said. She signed it before the wedding. There is a clause invalidating the marriage settlement if the union ends before the birth of a child. There is a clause transferring custody automatically to Grant if Claire is deemed mentally unfit. And there is an existing psychiatric history being manufactured in her medical records by a physician who is clearly complicit. He looked at her across the coffee table. He built a cage out of paperwork before he built the one in the basement, he said, which means the cage in the basement was a backup plan. He wanted her to sign the papers voluntarily. When she overheard the phone call and became too aware to manage quietly, the backup plan activated. Can we fight it? We can do considerably more than fight it, James said. We go criminal, not family court, not divorce proceedings. We go to the district attorney with everything on this drive, and we make this about what it actually is. A premeditated, documented crime against a pregnant woman, conducted by two people for financial gain. He closed the laptop. But I need to know one thing first. What? How much are they offering you to go away quietly? I don't know yet. They will offer you something significant, and I need you to be ready for that moment. Because the number will be real, and the temptation will be real, and what I am asking you to choose instead will be harder and longer and more painful than anything you have been through yet. Claire looked at the USB drive sitting on the coffee table. How many women before me? She asked. James said nothing. Betty, from the kitchen doorway, said quietly, that is what we are going to find out. His name was Tom Harker. He was 34 years old, wore shirts that needed ironing, and had been investigating the Whitfield family's business practices for 2.5 years for a regional magazine that paid him well enough to rent a decent apartment and not much else. He met Claire and Meg at a coffee shop in Hartford on a Thursday morning. 24 hours after Claire had left the Whitfield estate, he put 3 photographs on the table between them without preamble. Sarah Brennan, he said, dated Grant from spring of 2015 to early 2016. 8 months. She got pregnant at 6 months in. The pregnancy ended at 14 weeks following a fall in her apartment. The fall was ruled accidental. He paused. Her medical records, which I obtained through a source, document injuries inconsistent with the direction and force of a standard slip and fall. He moved to the second photograph. Lauren Tate. Relationship in 2017. Lasted 6 months. She was 23. The relationship ended when she signed a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure agreement. The settlement amount was not disclosed. She moved to Portland, Oregon, and has not given interviews or spoken about the relationship since. Third photograph. Diane Marsh, first wife. Married in 2017, divorced in 2019 after 2 years. Received a settlement of $2.2 million contingent on a permanent NDA. Currently lives in Austin, Texas. Has not spoken publicly about the marriage. He looked at Claire directly. You are the fourth. And you are the first one who has not taken the money and gone. Claire looked at the 3 photographs. 3 women, 3 faces, different ages and features, but something recognizable in all of them. A particular quality of the eyes, the look of a person who has learned to be careful. Vanessa Cole was present in all 4 situations, Tom said. Claire looked up. Not as Grant's assistant, not as a recent hire. She and Grant have been business partners for 10 years. During the Sarah Brennan situation, Vanessa was working in the building where Sarah lived, in a company that Grant had invested in. During the Lauren Tate settlement, it was Vanessa who coordinated the legal appointments, who was present during the signing, who walked Lauren out of the office afterward. He set down his notebook. Vanessa Cole is not the mistress who got caught up in something. She is a co-architect. Every woman Grant has been with has been managed as a business liability, and Vanessa has been the operations person on every one of those management decisions. Meg said something quiet and precise that will not be repeated here. Claire sat very still. The partnership clause. Partners must remain unencumbered. 3 years of careful cultivation. The remembered cat's name. The warm kitchen in Columbus. The pot roast. All of it in service of a plan that had been running for a decade, that had processed 4 women through it with increasing efficiency, that had resulted in settlements and silence and the quiet ongoing damage of 3 lives. Why are you telling me this? Claire asked. Because I have been trying to write this story for 2.5 years, and every woman I have approached has been too afraid or too bound by NDAs, or too determined to simply move on to speak on record, and you are not bound by anything yet. And what they did to you is documented in a way that the other situations were not. He leaned forward. I want to publish this story, with your permission, with your testimony, with the evidence on that drive. And I think if you reach out to Sarah and Lauren and Diane, they might be ready to speak. After what happened to you, the story is bigger than it has ever been. Claire thought of Lauren Tate at 23, walking out of an office after signing her silence away. She thought of Diane Marsh in Austin, $2.2 million in a legal obligation to pretend that 2 years of her life had not happened. She thought of Sarah Brennan's fall at 14 weeks. She thought of the baby moving inside her. "Give me their contact information," she said. Sarah Brennan lived in Chicago now. She worked as a physical therapist. She answered on the fourth ring. And when Claire told her who she was and why she was calling, she was quiet for 11 seconds. Then she said, "I have been waiting for this call for 4 years. What do you need?" Lauren Tate in Portland took 3 calls and 2 voicemails. When she finally called back, her first question was whether NDAs were breakable under duress, with evidence of fraudulent inducement. James Calloway, listening on speaker, said yes. Lauren cried, not from sadness, from something more complicated, the particular relief of a person who has been told they are allowed to speak after years of being required to be silent. Diane Marsh in Austin called back within an hour of the first voicemail. She was composed and direct and said, "Tell me where and when. I will be there." They met the following Tuesday in Meg's living room, 4 women around a coffee table. Howard the cat investigated and then retreated to the bedroom. Meg made real tea. They did not need introductions. They recognized each other with the immediate certainty of people who have survived the same thing and can identify it in another person the way survivors always can, through something that is not sight or sound but something older and more precise. One by one, they spoke. Sarah described the gradual isolation, the way Grant had managed her social connections, framing himself as protective and her friends as problematic, until the circle around her had narrowed to the point where he was the primary relationship in her life, and his assessment of reality was the only one she heard regularly. She described the fall. She described the hospital. She described Vanessa sitting in the waiting room, handling logistics with quiet efficiency, as if the end of Sarah's pregnancy was a business matter to be processed and filed. Lauren described the settlement meeting, the way Vanessa had been friendly and warm and had told her she was making the right decision, the way the document had been dense with language she did not fully understand, and the lawyer she had been offered to review it had, she would later learn, been paid by Grant's firm. Diane described 2 years of a marriage that looked perfect from every external angle and felt, from inside, like being slowly submerged. No single event, no dramatic violence, just a steady, patient erosion of every resource she had. Her confidence, her friendships, her financial independence, her ability to trust her own judgment. Claire described the cage. When she finished, the room was silent. Tom Harker, in the corner with his recorder running, did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "This is the story. This is everything." The article should have published on a Friday. By Thursday afternoon, Tom Harker called James Calloway to say that the magazine had received a letter from a law firm representing Grant Whitfield and Vanessa Cole, threatening a defamation suit with a projected legal cost that the magazine's general counsel estimated at $400,000 minimum to defend, regardless of outcome. The magazine pulled the article. Tom sent it to 3 other publications over the next 48 hours. 2 did not respond. One sent a form letter that said they were not currently accepting unsolicited submissions of this nature. James delivered this news to Claire in Meg's living room on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after she had left the house. Claire sat with both hands on her belly and her face very still. "We still have the criminal case," James said. The article was important, but it was not the foundation. The foundation is the evidence. "What is the alternative?" Claire asked. "Tom has a personal publication platform, 80,000 regular readers. It is not the magazine, but it is something. Tell him to publish everything, whatever he can, whenever he is ready." That night, at 2 in the morning, the contractions began. Claire was asleep in Meg's guest room when it started. She lay still for a moment, counting seconds between the first and second, hoping it was the false labor that Dr. Ellison had mentioned months ago. Before Dr. Ellison had become a name she associated with falsified records and a physician who had sold his professional integrity for whatever Grant Whitfield had paid him. Third contraction, 4 minutes from the second, real. Progressing. She was 31 weeks pregnant, not due for 9 more weeks. Meg drove to Hartford General with the controlled efficiency of an ER physician who did not permit panic in professional situations. Claire counted contractions in the passenger seat, 3 minutes apart by the time they arrived. The labor and delivery ward admitted her immediately. Monitors attached. IV line started, fetal heartbeat loud in the room, strong and steady and present. The on-call physician reviewed her chart. She heard the name before she saw the face. Dr. Ellison was on call. He appeared in the doorway of her room with the practiced concern of a man who had been playing this role for a long time. Meg stepped in front of him before he crossed the threshold. "You are not her physician," Meg said. Her voice was precise and completely level. "You will not enter this room. I'm on call tonight, and you have a falsified psychiatric history in her chart that you inserted without her knowledge or consent. You will step back from this door, or I will have you reported to the Connecticut Medical Examining Board before morning rounds. And I will be contacting hospital administration in approximately 4 minutes regardless." She paused. "I am also an attending physician at this hospital. We can have a conversation about professional standing if you prefer, doctor." Ellison stepped back, but someone in the ward had already made a call. Grant arrived 47 minutes later, 2 lawyers behind him. He was in a dark suit, and his face held the expression of a man who had rehearsed this entrance and was delivering it with precision. He stood in the doorway of Claire's room and looked at her with such careful, public tenderness that she could see him constructing the narrative in real time, building the audience he wanted, ensuring that the nurses and the orderly and anyone in the hallway understood what they were seeing. A devoted husband, a frightened father, a man here for his wife. He said her name warmly. He said he had come as soon as he heard. He said he was worried about her, about their baby, about this whole terrible misunderstanding, and that whatever had happened between them could be worked through. But right now what mattered was her and the child. He said all of this for the hallway as much as for her. The baby's heartbeat monitor beeped in the room, steady, strong. Claire looked at him. She looked at the face she had studied for 4 years, the face she had believed loved her. The face she now understood had been performing love with remarkable dedication in service of a plan she had been too trusting and too hopeful to see. "Security, please," she said clearly. 2 security officers arrived. Grant's lawyers protested. Grant maintained his expression of grieved concern all the way to the elevator doors. When they were gone, Claire started crying. Not quietly, not in the controlled way she had been managing her emotions for 2 weeks. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere below thought. From some physical accumulation of everything that had happened and everything that was still happening, and the baby coming too early, and the man she had chosen standing in her hospital doorway using her pain as stage blocking. Meg sat on the edge of the bed and held her. "You're allowed," Meg said. "You are completely allowed." The contractions slowed over the next 2 hours. The medication worked. The baby held. At 6 in the morning, when Claire had finally slept for 3 hours and the monitors showed everything stable, the door to her room opened again. She sat up, expecting Meg, expecting a nurse. Vanessa Cole stood in the doorway in expensive clothes and perfect makeup, looking like a woman making a routine social visit. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "Genuinely. Whatever you think of me." I was concerned. Claire did not speak. "I also want to tell you something," Vanessa continued. "We have footage from the house, from the basement. Edited footage that, in context, would suggest that the situation you describe was consensual, a private arrangement between a husband and wife." She met Claire's eyes. "You have 48 hours to reconsider your position. Walk away with the settlement. Take your daughter somewhere beautiful and raise her, and never think about any of this again. Or the footage goes online and we let the public decide what they believe." She turned to leave. At the door she paused. "Think about your daughter," she said. "Think about what you want her to grow up reading about her mother." She left. Claire sat in the hospital bed for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Tom Harker. "The edited footage," she said. "If it exists, it was created on a device. If it was created on a device, it has metadata, timestamps, editing software, the IP address of the machine it was made on. Can you run that if I can get you the file? If they post it publicly, I can pull the metadata within minutes," Tom said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they are going to make the mistake that people who are certain they are untouchable always make eventually," Claire said. "They are going to overreach. And I want to be ready when they do. Publish everything, tonight." She ended the call. She lay back against the pillow. The baby moved inside her, a long rolling motion, present and real. "I know," Claire said quietly. "I know. We're almost through it." Tom's article went live at 11:47 on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, it had been shared 40,000 times. By Friday afternoon, 80,000. The metadata from the video Vanessa posted, which had appeared on a private social media account and been screenshot and circulated before it was taken down, showed it had been created 4 days earlier on a device registered to a law firm. Grant's law firm. His own legal team had manufactured evidence. Tom included this in a follow-up piece published Friday evening. That piece was read by 1.2 million people by Monday morning. James Calloway filed for the emergency restraining order and emergency protective custody measures on a Monday. The hearing was set for Wednesday. Judge Patricia Holloway presided. The Hartford County Courthouse had tall windows and wood-paneled walls, and the smell of paper and cleaned carpet and the particular quality of stillness that rooms built for serious purpose sometimes develop over decades of serious use. Claire arrived with James and Meg and Sarah and Lauren and Diane, who had flown in from their respective cities because they had chosen, each of them independently and then together, that this time there would be no settlement and no silence and no quiet disappearance. Grant was already there with 6 lawyers. 6 in matching dark suits, with briefcases and tablets, and the polished ease of people who had won every expensive legal fight they had ever been paid to win. He did not look at Claire. This was also a performance. The careful non-acknowledgement of a man who wanted the room to see that he was above what was being done to him. Margaret Whitfield sat in the gallery. Thomas Whitfield was not present. He had submitted a sworn affidavit from Singapore, 12 pages long, describing what he knew about his son's pattern of behavior going back to the first serious relationship, describing the settlement that had been arranged for Diane Marsh, describing the business structure that required the marriages to end, describing his own complicity in maintaining a silence he should never have maintained. The affidavit ended with a paragraph that James had read aloud to Claire, and that Claire had read again herself 3 times. It said, "I am submitting this testimony because I have spent the past several years watching a pattern repeat that I had the power and the responsibility to stop. I chose family loyalty over honesty and over the safety of women who deserve protection. I cannot undo what has been done. I can only ensure that my testimony is complete, accurate, and as useful as possible to those who are trying to stop it." Judge Holloway was 61 years old. With silver hair cropped close and reading glasses she removed when she wanted to look at something directly. She looked at Claire directly when Claire took the stand. Claire told the story again. The gala, the phone call, the massage, the tea, waking on the concrete floor, the bars, the water bowl with the bone shapes around the rim, Vanessa's phone recording, the voicemail with the threat of psychiatric commitment, the blood test results, Dr. Ellison's falsified records, the hospital, Grant in the doorway. She told it the way she had practiced with James, clearly, without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight they carried because they did not need embellishment. Grant's lead attorney spent 45 minutes on cross-examination. He was skilled and relentless and worked the words involuntary, perception, and documented inconsistency with the practiced frequency of someone who had won cases with exactly this vocabulary before. Betty Harmon took the stand and was unshakable. 9 years, she said. She described the recordings and what was in them. She described the financial documents. She described the pattern of women she had seen come and go. She described the afternoon she came back for her phone charger and found Mrs. Whitfield in the dog crate. Grant's attorney suggested she was a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. "I am a woman who found another woman in a cage," Betty said. "I would describe that as a reason, not a grievance." A murmur moved through the gallery. Judge Holloway did not gavel it silent. Sarah Brennan's testimony by video, Lauren Tate's testimony by video, Diane Marsh's testimony, live from the chair beside James Calloway's table. Her voice steady and her facts precise, and the NDA she had signed no longer binding under the fraudulent inducement exception that James had argued successfully in a pre-hearing motion. Thomas Whitfield's affidavit, read into the record by the court clerk. Grant declined to testify on the advice of counsel. Margaret Whitfield, in the gallery, sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face perfectly composed. When Thomas's affidavit was read, she stood quietly, collected her bag, and walked out of the courtroom without making eye contact with anyone. She did not return. Judge Holloway removed her glasses. She looked at Grant. She said, "Mr. Whitfield, I have sat on this bench for 26 years. I have heard testimony in thousands of domestic and family matters. What I have heard in this courtroom today does not require me to determine the exact truth of every disputed detail. What it requires me to determine is whether the preponderance of evidence suggests that this woman and her unborn child are at risk in your presence." She paused. "It does. Temporary restraining order. 500 feet. No contact. Direct or indirect. Sole medical authority declare for the remainder of the pregnancy. As for the criminal allegations presented in the accompanying motion," the judge continued, "I am referring this matter to the district attorney for Hartford County with my strong personal recommendation for prosecution. The evidence presented today describes not a domestic dispute but a coordinated, premeditated pattern of criminal behavior targeting multiple victims over multiple years. That is outside the scope of this court, but very much within the scope of criminal law. She gavelled. Grant's lawyers were already moving, already talking about appeals, about the standard of evidence in a family court preliminary hearing, about the difference between a judge's recommendation and an actual indictment. Outside, in the corridor, James Calloway looked at Claire and said, "First round, ours." Claire leaned against the wall. The baby kicked, hard, emphatic. "Present, thank you," Claire said. To James, to Meg, to Sarah and Lauren and Diane standing together in the courthouse hallway with their coats over their arms. "All of you." "We're not done," Sarah said. "No," Claire said. "But today we won something real." She stood up straight and walked toward the courthouse doors. And the winter light came through the glass in the long, flat way it comes in December. And it was cold outside. And she did not care. Because she was walking out of the courthouse under her own power and on her own terms. And the man who had built a cage for her in his basement was behind her with his 6 lawyers having a conversation about how to salvage the unsalvageable. She pushed through the door. The air was sharp and clean, and she stood on the courthouse steps and breathed it in. One full breath, and then another, and then her phone buzzed. Tom Harker. "The DA just called me for a comment," he said. "They filed charges this afternoon. 4 counts of false imprisonment, 2 counts of assault, 1 count of conspiracy, and they added obstruction of justice based on the metadata. Both of them, Grant and Vanessa, both." Vanessa Cole had been arrested at her office at 3 that afternoon, Tom said. Walked out in handcuffs. The photographs were already running on every news outlet that had been following the story. Grant turned himself in before 5, posted $2 million bail before 6. The money was, as James had predicted, nothing to him. But the money could not undo the arrest. The money could not unfile the charges. The money could not unring the bell of a story that had now been read by 4 million people and was running on national news. Claire stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the December sky. Her daughter kicked. "I know," Claire said quietly. "We did good today." Emma Claire Harmon came into the world on a Saturday morning in December, 3 weeks after the arraignment, at 7:22 in the morning at Hartford General Hospital. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, present and significant even at birth, eyes that would settle into brown in the coming weeks, the color of good soil, of things that grow. She arrived, as the midwife said afterward, with an opinion about it. Loudly, Betty Harmon was in the waiting room, sitting in one of the plastic chairs with a cup of bad hospital coffee, wearing her church clothes because she had come straight from the early service. When Meg came out to tell her, Betsy sat very still for a moment and then pressed both hands over her face and did not say anything. Meg gave her time. This was the gift Meg had always had, the understanding of when silence was more useful than words. Sarah Brennan had driven down from Chicago the day before, when the labor started. She sat in the waiting room chair next to Betty and had sent approximately 40 text messages in the past 7 hours, which was, for Sarah, the equivalent of emotional effusiveness. Lauren Tate had taken a red-eye from Portland and arrived at 5 in the morning with her coat still damp from the Portland rain and a bag from the all-night convenience store containing items she thought might be useful. Most of them were not useful in the specific medical situation, but the effort had mattered completely. Diane Marsh had sent flowers, a large arrangement of white and yellow flowers that arrived at 7 and were placed on the windowsill of Claire's room where the December light hit them well. Tom Harker sent a text that said, "Congratulations. I'm outside. I don't know what the etiquette is for this situation. Let me know if there's anything you need." He was sitting in the parking lot in his car. Meg went out and told him to come inside, and he looked relieved. James Calloway sent a card. The card said, in his precise handwriting, "We won. Rest now. The next fight can wait until you're ready. She is going to be extraordinary." He had signed it formally, his full name, which was how James Calloway expressed emotion. Thomas Whitfield sent a card and a check. The card said, "I have established a foundation in Emma's name to support women leaving coercive relationships, particularly those involving legal or financial entrapment. It is not enough. Nothing I can do will be enough, but it is what I can do." The check was for an amount that Claire set aside without looking at it directly, because she needed time before she could think about that. Margaret Whitfield sent nothing. Claire did not spend a single moment wondering about this. She had made her peace with Margaret's silence before Emma arrived. In the way you make peace with the things you cannot change when you have spent enough energy on what you can. Grant was in a minimum security facility 2 states away, processing intake paperwork and meeting with his attorneys about the plea arrangement. He had requested, through legal channels, to be present at the birth. The request had been reviewed and denied by Judge Holloway's standing order. Judith Harmon, Claire's mother, a woman who had worked the front desk of a dental practice for 22 years and put her daughter through college on a salary that most people in the world Claire had just left would not have considered livable, sat in the chair beside the hospital bed and held Claire's hand while Emma slept in the bassinet and the December morning light came through the window in long, warm strips. "You should have listened to me," Judith said, not accusatory. The factual tone of a woman who loved her daughter and had learned over the course of a year to say the difficult things plainly. "I know, Mom," Claire said. "I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I know you're not. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I knew. Mothers know. We see the things our children can't see when they're inside it." Judith was quiet for a moment. "And I also want you to know that I understand why you couldn't hear me. When you're in it, when someone has built everything you see around you and you're trying to believe in it, the person who says be careful can sound like the person who doesn't believe in your happiness. I know that now. I should have found a different way to say it." Claire looked at her mother, at the face she had known her entire life, tired and patient and steady in the way that certain kinds of love are steady, not dramatic, not performed, just present, every day, always. "You said it right," Claire said. "I just wasn't ready to hear it." Judith looked at Emma. "What's her name?" she asked. "You still haven't told me." Claire had thought about this for weeks. She had gone through the traditional names, the meaningful names, the names that had stories behind them, and none of them had fit in the way she needed them to fit. She had needed a name that was complete in itself, a name that belonged to the person who would carry it, not to the story that had surrounded her birth. She looked at her daughter in the bassinet, at the small, certain face, at the hands already gripping the air with the particular conviction of a person who has already decided they are going to hold on to things. "Emma," she said. "Just Emma. She can decide the rest herself." Judith smiled, the particular smile that belongs to grandmothers in that first quiet hour. 6 months after Emma's birth, Grant Whitfield entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of assault and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. He was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility, 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory participation in a batterer intervention program, and a permanent restraining order. His attorneys had negotiated the plea with considerable skill. It was lighter than what James had hoped for. It was heavier than anything that had happened to him before. Vanessa Cole entered a separate plea to conspiracy and obstruction. 8 months. 3 years probation. Her company had lost its 2 anchor clients in the weeks following her arrest. The Singapore deal, the 10-year business plan that had consumed 4 women as obstacles in its path, collapsed entirely when the partnership's legal structure was exposed in the criminal proceedings. Dr. Ellison surrendered his medical license before the hearing at which he was to be investigated. He issued a statement that used the words pressured and coerced extensively and the word sorry not at all. Tom Harker's follow-up series on the Whitfield case was nominated for a Regional Journalism Award and published in full by a national magazine that had been watching the story with interest since the first piece ran. He told Claire about the nomination in a text, and she sent back a photograph of Emma and the words she earned it. The apartment Claire moved into was small and clean and belonged to her, which meant that every object in it was there because she had chosen it, and every corner of it was exactly as she wanted it, and the locks were ones that only she had keys to. 2 bedrooms. Yellow walls in Emma's room, which had been Judith's idea and turned out to be right. Bookshelves already filling with the board books that Meg and Sarah and Lauren and Diane had sent. A small library for a person who could not yet read but would. On a Tuesday morning in April, when Emma was 4 months old and the Connecticut spring had finally committed itself, Claire sat in the rocking chair in Emma's room with her daughter on her chest, and the sunlight coming through the yellow curtains and the sounds of the neighborhood coming through the window. Ordinary sounds. Traffic and birds and someone's radio and a child calling from somewhere down the street. She thought about the woman she had been before this, the one who had walked into a marriage with her eyes open, she believed, and had not seen the architecture of it clearly enough until she was inside it with the door closed behind her. She thought about the nights she had counted floor tiles and talked herself out of what she already knew. That woman was gone, not erased, changed, completed, maybe in the way that fire completes iron. Still herself, just harder in places that needed hardening and, strangely, softer in places she had not expected. She thought about the one question she was asked most often now, in the interviews she gave carefully and selectively, in the support group she had started meeting with monthly, in the conversations with women who reached out to her through the foundation Thomas had established. The question was always some version of, how did you know to fight instead of run? The answer was always the same. She had not known. She had been terrified and exhausted and 7 months pregnant in a dog crate in a basement. She had not felt strong. She had not felt certain. She had felt the baby move, and she had made a promise she did not know yet how to keep. And she had decided to try. That was all. The trying had led to Betty. Betty had led to Meg and James. James had led to the evidence, and the evidence had led to Sarah and Lauren and Diane and the courtroom and the verdict, and this morning and this room and this child on her chest, breathing steadily against her collarbone. She had not been brave to begin with. She had become brave because she had started and kept going. Emma stirred, made the sound that meant almost awake. One small hand opened and found the fabric of Claire's shirt and closed around it. Claire put her hand over her daughter's hand. Outside, a bird landed on the fire escape railing, sat there for a moment, head tilted, examining the world with the complete confidence of a creature that had no reason to doubt its right to be exactly where it was. Then it flew. Claire watched it go. "You are safe," she said quietly, to Emma, to herself, to the version of herself who had been in the dark with her hands on her belly making promises she did not know how to keep. "We are safe, and we are going to be okay." She believed it, not as a performance, not as something she was telling herself to manage fear. She believed it the way you believe things that have been proven true through sustained effort over a very long time. The light shifted through the yellow curtains. Emma breathed. The city went on outside the window, full of its ordinary morning. And Claire Harmon sat in the rocking chair in the room she had painted yellow in the apartment that was entirely hers, and held her daughter, and was still. "Before you go, I want to say something directly. Claire's story is not unusual. That is the most important and the most difficult thing I can tell you. The pattern she lived through has a name: coercive control. It is documented in research. It is recognizable in retrospect in a way that it often is not recognizable while you are inside it, because it is designed not to be recognizable from the inside. If something in this story felt familiar to you, not dramatic, not extreme, but familiar, I want you to sit with that feeling and not explain it away. There are 3 things Claire identified as the difference between surviving and not. She documented before she was ready to leave. She found one person who believed her, and she refused the money. Not because it was not real money, but because silence bought with money is still silence. And she understood what her silence would cost the women who came after her. If you are in something right now, please find your Betty. Please find your Meg. They exist. The National Domestic Violence Hotline number is 1-800-799-7233. You can also text the word START to 88788. Both are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and both are confidential. If this story mattered to you, please hit the like button and leave a comment, even just the words "I was here," because knowing someone else heard this matters. Share it with one person, not for any algorithm, but because somewhere right now there is a woman sitting in a very nice house, counting the tiles on the floor, talking herself out of what she already knows. Maybe this reaches her. Subscribe if you want more stories every week. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the first step is not knowing exactly how to get out. The first step is deciding to try. I will see you in the next one.